On the cold, silent night of Christmas Eve in 1871, while most of the world was wrapped in holiday cheer, a hidden tragedy unfolded on the outskirts of a rural southern town. Amid a blanket of freshly fallen snow, an enslaved woman, alone and desperate, gave birth under circumstances that no human should ever endure. Her labor was not witnessed by family, midwives, or doctors, only by the unforgiving winter and the shadow of oppression that had defined her life. But what made this night unforgettable and haunting was not just the act of birth itself. When the villagers eventually discovered her and the newborn, they were confronted with an object beside the child that would ignite whispers, fear, and questions that no one could easily answer. That small, mysterious item would reveal a story of courage, suffering, and a truth that the world was determined to ignore. This is the story of a mother, a child, and a secret that refused to stay buried in the snow. On Christmas Eve of 1871, the world seemed to be divided between two starkly contrasting realities. In the towns and villages where wealth and comfort prevailed, the night was filled with warm fires, the scent of baked goods, and the laughter of families gathered together in celebration. Homes were adorned with greenery, candles flickered in windows, and the air carried the soft harmonies of carolers moving from door to door, their voices weaving a tapestry of hope and joy. Outside, the sky was clear, and the moon cast a pale glow on streets dusted with snow that glimmered like tiny shards of crystal under the lamplight. In those moments it seemed as though the world had paused to honor a sacred time, a time of peace, love, and reflection. Yet for every house alive with warmth and cheer, there were places untouched by such joy, hidden corners where the harsh realities of life made the celebration seem like a distant, unattainable dream. Beyond the towns and the manicured streets lay the expanses of farmland and plantations that stretched across the countryside. Here the cold was not simply a backdrop for festivity. It was a living, biting force that tested endurance and survival. Snow blanketed the fields in heavy layers, and the wind whipped across open spaces, finding its way under the rough clothing of laborers who had no choice but to work despite the weather. On this particular night, the world of the enslaved was one of silent suffering, a reality unnoticed by most who lived in warmth and comfort. The darkness of the night was punctuated not by cheerful lanterns but by the faint glimmer of distant lights from farmhouses, often dimmed to conserve resources, leaving the workers shivering in shadows. The snow, beautiful in appearance, became an unforgiving landscape that offered neither shelter nor mercy, reflecting back only the cold harshness of lives bound by oppression. For the enslaved, every day carried a weight of uncertainty, but winter brought with it an added dimension of danger. Food was scarce, clothing was insufficient, and the ability to keep warm was always precarious. On this particular Christmas Eve, the conditions were severe even by those standards. The snow had fallen continuously for days, forming drifts that reached the knees in some places, and the wind carried with it a biting chill that made every step a laborious effort. Those who were tasked with tending livestock or fetching firewood faced the dual threat of exposure and exhaustion, knowing that a single misstep or a moment of weakness could prove deadly. The night itself seemed endless, stretching into the hours where the cold felt almost tangible, a weight pressing down on every living creature, human or animal alike. Amid this frozen expanse there was a small cabin, poorly insulated and barely standing against the element. Its wooden walls creaked and groaned as the wind forced itself through cracks and gaps, rattling shutters, and sending a chorus of hollow sounds through the darkness. Inside, a single figure moved cautiously, her body straining against exhaustion, her breath shallow and uneven. The woman, an enslaved laborer, had been sent to the field earlier that day, and had returned with only scraps of food and a promise of rest that now seemed laughably insufficient. She was pregnant, near the end of her term, and the labor pains that began as mere twinges earlier in the day were now growing in intensity, each wave pressing down on her chest and stomach with relentless force. She had no midwife, no medical assistance, no family to comfort her. She was entirely alone, and the realization of that solitude weighed heavily on her as much as the cold that seeped through the cabin walls. The snow outside had muffled most sounds, creating a strange, almost eerie silence that contrasted sharply with the turmoil within her. The flakes continued to drift down in quiet, relentless persistence, layering themselves over the ground and any surfaces they touched, making the world outside appear serene and beautiful, though this beauty was cruelly deceptive. In that silence the woman could hear only the beating of her own heart, and the labored breaths that accompanied each contraction. Her mind, fogged by fatigue and pain, struggled to focus on anything beyond the immediate reality of childbirth. Memories of past hardships, of days spent working from dawn to dusk under the watchful eyes of overseers, surfaced in fragmented flashes. She recalled moments of hunger, of punishments inflicted for minor missteps, and of the ever-present fear that she and her children could be sold or separated at any time. These memories merged with the present pain, creating a blur of fear and anticipation that seemed almost unbearable. Despite the harsh conditions and her immense suffering, there was a small spark of hope that accompanied her. The child she carried represented not just life but a form of resistance, a continuation of her family line, and a small stubborn assertion of humanity in a world that sought to strip it away. She thought of the generations that had come before her, who had endured even greater hardships, and she drew a faint strength from their survival. Each contraction, though agonizing, was also a reminder that she was still alive, still capable of bringing forth life even under circumstances designed to break her spirit. She gripped the rough wooden floorboards for support, grounding herself in the tangible reality of her body and the imminent arrival of her child. Outside the cabin, the snow continued to fall, forming drifts that obscured the familiar paths and landmarks. The wind's mournful howl seemed almost like a voice echoing the pain and struggle contained within the small dwelling. It was as if the entire night had conspired to test her resolve, to measure the limits of endurance in a world that offered little kindness to those in her position. She struggled to maintain consciousness through the hours, feeling the cold penetrate deeper with every passing moment. Her body trembled, not only from the chill but from the physical exertion of labor, each movement requiring an extraordinary effort that taxed both muscles and willpower. The snow, though beautiful from a distance, seemed indifferent to her suffering, a silent witness to a moment that would otherwise have been hidden from the world forever. As the hours dragged on, the tension within the cabin grew almost unbearable. Every sound outside, every rustle of the wind or shift in the snow seemed amplified, and her imagination conjured shadows that moved with sinister intent. She knew that no one was coming to help, that the overseers would not notice her absence unless the work went undone, and that her only recourse was to rely on herself and the instinctive knowledge that had guided countless mothers before her in similar circumstances. The weight of that reality pressed down with an almost physical force, yet she endured, breathing through the pain, finding positions that offered the slightest relief, whispering prayers under her breath, and preparing mentally for the arrival of a life she had nurtured for months in secrecy and solitude. The snow outside continued to fall layer upon layer, masking the tracks that led to the cabin, hiding the small struggle within from any prying eye. It was a night of contrasts, serene and deadly, beautiful and cruel, silent and filled with unseen suffering. The cold, pervasive and unyielding, was both an enemy and a witness, pressing against her skin while also ensuring that the world beyond remained oblivious to the drama unfolding in that remote corner of the plantation. Every flake that settled on the frozen ground was a reminder that time moved relentlessly, indifferent to her agony, marking the passage of the hours as she drew closer to the moment that would define the night forever. The enslaved woman's labor on that fateful Christmas Eve of 1871 was unlike any other night she had experienced in her life. Alone in a small drafty cabin, she faced the unimaginable challenge of bringing a child into the world without assistance, without comfort, and without the knowledge that she could rely on anyone to intervene if something went wrong. The air inside the cabin was heavy with the scent of damp wood and the faint smoke from a dying fire that had long since lost its strength to ward off the cold. Her body, already weakened from years of labor in the fields and the inadequate nutrition that came with her status, now had to endure the extraordinary physical and emotional demands of childbirth under extreme conditions. Every contraction brought with it a mixture of intense pain, fear, and anticipation, and she fought to maintain consciousness, to remain aware, to prepare herself for the moment when her child would emerge into the freezing world outside. The woman's isolation was perfect. There was no midwife to guide her through the process, no other women to offer encouragement or practical assistance, no family members to ease the strain of labor with comforting words or gentle hands. She relied solely on her own instincts, honed through observation, experience, and the unspoken knowledge passed down through generations of women who had faced similar circumstances. Every movement had to be deliberate, every decision calculated, as even a minor misstep could jeopardize her life or the life of her child. She shifted positions on the cold, hard floorboards, attempting to find angles that provided some relief, leaning against the rough walls for support, and gripping the edges of her scant bedding to brace against the overwhelming force of each contraction. Pain coursed through her body in waves that left her gasping, sweating, and trembling, yet she persisted, driven by an almost primal determination to bring life into the world despite the obstacles surrounding her. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the landscape in thick, unbroken drifts. The wind howled through the gaps in the cabin walls, rattling the wooden shutters and creating a chorus of eerie sounds that heightened the sense of vulnerability. With every gust seemed to echo the woman's fear, emphasizing her solitude and the magnitude of the challenge she faced. The frozen landscape was merciless, and the darkness seemed to extend endlessly, unbroken by the presence of human warmth or guidance. Though the snow muffled some of the sounds of the night, it also accentuated the silence, making every creak of the cabin, every groan of her body, every shallow breath seem unnaturally loud in the stillness. In this frozen and isolated environment, the woman's struggle became almost elemental, a battle not only with her own physical limitations but with the environment itself, which offered no mercy and demanded endurance. The physical strain of childbirth under these conditions was compounded by the psychological burden she carried. Her mind was a storm of thoughts, fears and fragmented memory. She recalled the faces of overseers, the harshness of punishment for minor infractions, the exhaustion of endless days in the fields, and the relentless vigilance required to survive under the watchful eyes of those who considered her property rather than a human being. She remembered the friends and relatives who had been sold or punished, and the anxiety over what the future might hold for her child in a world that offered so little protection for those in her position. Amid these reflections, a fierce determination emerged, an insistence that her child would survive, that her lineage would continue, and that this moment, despite its pain and danger, was a testament to her resilience and humanity. As the hours passed, her labor intensified. The contractions came faster, stronger, and with more urgency, leaving her no time to rest between waves of pain. Her body reacted instinctively, pushing, twisting, and straining as it followed the natural rhythm of birth, guided by a deep internal knowledge that she had to trust complete. She focused on her breathing, on the sensations coursing through her, on the tiny movements of her child within her womb, using every ounce of mental and physical energy to prepare for delivery. The cabin's cold seemed to seep into her bones, but her body generated its own heat in response to the immense exertion, a reminder of the resilience that had carried her through countless hardships. She whispered prayers, muttered encouragements to herself and the unborn child, and tried to maintain a semblance of control in a situation that was as unpredictable as it was dangerous. The reality of giving birth alone under such conditions was terrifying. There was no one to identify complications, no one to call for help, and no guarantee that either she or the child would survive. Any emergency, any unforeseen difficulty, could result in tragedy, and yet she had no choice but to face the situation head-on. Her mind cycled between fear and hope, between despair and determination, as she navigated the physical and emotional demands of labor. She had prepared as best she could, using what knowledge she had gathered from observation and experience, but the stakes were infinitely higher than anything she had faced before. Each moment was a test of endurance, each contraction a reminder of the fragility of life, and the strength required to preserve it. Her awareness extended beyond her own suffering. She thought of the newborn child, fragile and vulnerable, entering a world where safety and comfort were scarce, especially for those born into the bonds of slavery. The urgency to bring the baby safely into the world was accompanied by an understanding that the child's first moments would be perilous. She considered the cold, the lack of warmth, and the need to provide immediate care, despite having no resources or support. This awareness heightened the intensity of her efforts, as every movement, every breath, and every ounce of strength became a conscious act of protection for the life she was about to bring forth. Despite the overwhelming challenges, there was a rhythm to her labor. The contractions, while painful, offered a structure to her focus, a guiding cadence that she could follow. She learned to ride each wave, to anticipate its peak and recover in the brief intervals of relative relief. Her body responded with remarkable efficiency, a testament to the resilience and adaptability honed over years of physical labor and survival in harsh conditions. The physical environment, cold, unforgiving and isolating, tested her resolve, but it also sharpened her focus, compelling her to rely entirely on instinct, endurance, and the deep connection to the life she carried within her. As the night deepened, the darkness seemed almost alive, pressing against the cabin walls, yet within that oppressive blackness, she found moments of clarity, her mind and body synchronized in a delicate balance, each contraction drawing her closer to the imminent arrival of her child. She visualized the process, guided herself through each stage, and adapted to the changing intensity of labor, with an unwavering determination. Pain, fear, cold, and exhaustion were constants, yet they did not deter her. Instead, they became components of a singular focused purpose: to see her child safely into the world and to endure as she always had, despite circumstances designed to break her spirit. The snow outside continued to fall, covering the ground and masking her struggle from the eyes of anyone who might have been near. The wind's mournful wail became a backdrop to the intimate and monumental event unfolding within the cabin. Alone, unassisted, and exposed to the elements, the woman continued through labor, drawing on every ounce of strength, courage, and resilience she could summon, fully aware that the life of her child, and possibly her own, depended on her ability to persevere through the most grueling ordeal imaginable. The night of Christmas Eve, 1871, was unforgiving in its cold, the kind of bitter chill that seemed to seep into bones and linger long after the body had sought warmth. For the enslaved woman enduring labor in the small cabin, the dangers were immediate and tangible. Every shiver that racked her body,
Every contraction that left her gasping and trembling underscored the precariousness of life in such extreme conditions. Her body was not merely fighting the act of childbirth itself, but was engaged in a simultaneous battle against the cold, against exhaustion, and against the constant threat that either she or her child might not survive the night. Outside, the world was silent, snow muffling sounds in a way that made the wind's howl seem louder, sharper, more menacing, as if the winter itself had taken note of her struggle and pressed its icy fingers even more firmly against the walls of the fragile cabin. The question of survival extended beyond the mere act of giving birth. The newborn, delicate and fragile, would need warmth, nourishment and protection from the freezing night immediately upon entering the world. There was no cradle, no swaddling cloths of sufficient warmth, and no midwife to guide the infant's first breaths. The woman's body became the infant's only source of life, heat and security. Her arms, already trembling from fatigue, would have to cradle the child against the cold, and her lungs, spent from exertion, would need to guide its first cries for air. Each moment carried immense risk. A misplaced movement, an uncontrolled shiver, or an inability to provide adequate warmth could mean disaster. The stakes were as high as they were invisible, a peril shared only between the mother and the unborn child. Her isolation amplified the danger. In the world of the enslaved, every help, every small act of assistance could be the difference between life and death, yet she had none. Neighbors, overseers, and family were either unaware or deliberately distant, leaving her to confront this ordeal alone. There was no medical knowledge at hand, no prepared bedding, no source of additional warmth beyond her own body and the remnants of the fire that struggled to survive in the drafty cabin. Even the snow outside, so calm and beautiful in its descent, became a threatening force, as every flake that fell on the frozen ground added to the difficulty of survival and signified the relentless passage of time. Each passing hour increased the vulnerability of both mother and child. Pain, already overwhelming from the act of labor, was compounded by the awareness of risk. The woman understood that complications, hemorrhage, prolonged labor, infection could strike at any moment. She had no tools, no medicine, and no one to intervene should the worst occur. Her body, weakened by years of backbreaking work in the fields and malnutrition, might fail her at the most critical instant, yet instinctively she continued, guided by a combination of innate knowledge and sheer willpower. Her focus narrowed, every thought directed toward survival and the safe delivery of her child, leaving little space for despair despite the enormity of the challenge. The cold outside was mirrored within the cabin. The wooden walls offered scant protection, allowing gusts of wind to weave through cracks and gaps, chilling her from head to toe. The floorboards beneath her were hard and unyielding, transmitting the icy cold into every joint and muscle. Her clothing, thin and worn from years of labor, offered minimal insulation. The lack of heat forced her body to generate warmth internally, a demand that taxed every muscle and strained every resource. Each contraction, each movement, drained her energy, yet she had no option to pause or rest. The combination of physical exertion and freezing temperatures created a delicate balance, where every second mattered, and any lapse could result in catastrophe. Beyond the physical, there were also the mental and emotional dangers. Loneliness and fear, amplified by the harsh environment, threatened to overwhelm her. She had to maintain focus under conditions designed to break both body and spirit. Every shadow cast by the flickering fire, every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind became magnified in her mind, transforming the night into a psychological, as well as physical trial. The snow outside, though silent and beautiful, served as a reminder.
The surrounding community, unaware of the enslaved woman's suffering on that Christmas Eve of 1871, carried on in their own insulated world, a world defined by the warmth of family, the glow of candlelight, and the illusion of safety that comes with distance from hardship. In the nearby town and scattered farmhouses, preparations for the holiday were underway, with people busy with last-minute chores, cooking and decorating, their minds occupied with thoughts of celebration rather than survival. The contrast between these lives and the reality of the woman in the snow-covered cabin was stark. While she wrestled with the monumental struggle of bringing a child into the world alone, those around her were oblivious, their attention consumed by traditions, merriment, and the small comforts of everyday life that insulated them from the suffering hidden just beyond their sight. The snow, falling in thick, silent layers, served as both a barrier and a veil. To those in the town, it created a picturesque scene, the kind often celebrated in paintings and poetry, yet it simultaneously concealed the harsh realities of life on the plantation outskirts. Tracks in the snow could have told a story of pain and struggle, but they went unnoticed, ignored or dismissed as ordinary marks left by animals or travelers. The quiet beauty of the landscape masked the desperation of the woman within the cabin, creating a juxtaposition between the perceived serenity of the night and the intense unseen struggle that unfolded in its shadows. This disconnect was emblematic of the broader social divide, where the suffering of the enslaved remained invisible to those who lived in comfort, their understanding limited by both ignorance and indifference. Within the cabin, the woman's focus remained entirely on her labor, yet she was not unaware of the world beyond. She understood the futility of calling out for help, for no one nearby would intervene, and even if they heard her cries, the response might be delayed or absent entirely due to social and racial hierarchy. The community's indifference or enforced ignorance was a constant unspoken threat, one that compounded the danger of her situation. She knew that her survival and that of her child rested entirely on her own strength, resourcefulness, and resilience, and that the comfort and assistance available to others were luxuries she could not hope to access. Her awareness of this disparity sharpened her focus and intensified the determination that had carried her through countless hardships before this night. As she labored, the stillness of the outside world contrasted sharply with the tumult within her. The wind whispered through the trees, and the snow fell steadily, yet there was no sign of intervention, no presence to break the solitude of her ordeal. The nearest neighbors were asleep, immersed in warmth and security, oblivious to the extraordinary event unfolding just beyond their perception. The physical distance was compounded by a social and psychological chasm. The woman's life and struggle existed in a space largely ignored by the community, a reality shaped by the entrenched systems of slavery and hierarchy that dictated whose suffering mattered and whose did not. She was acutely aware of this isolation, and it heightened both the urgency and the gravity of her actions, as she understood that no external aid would arrive in time to mitigate the risks she faced. Despite her solitary circumstances, the woman's awareness extended beyond immediate survival. She understood the implications of her child's birth in a society that devalued her life and the lives of her offspring. Each moment carried significance beyond the personal struggle. It was a challenge to a system designed to suppress and control her, a quiet act of defiance in a world that sought to strip her of agency. The community's ignorance did not lessen the stakes, it magnified them. Their unawareness meant that every decision she made, every action she took, had consequences that she alone bore, and the absence of witnesses amplified both the danger and the weight of responsibility she carried. The contrast between her isolation and the community's normalcy was further accentuated by the sensory environment. The quiet of the town and the gentle glow of fires in nearby homes created a sense of normalcy, almost a mockery of the intense struggle within the cabin. While others celebrated, laughed, and prepared for a night of festivity, she grappled with pain, exhaustion, and fear. Her labor was a private hidden drama, invisible to those who might otherwise have assisted, comforted, or even merely acknowledged her existence. This disconnect illustrated the stark divide between the lives of the enslaved and those of free citizens, a divide reinforced by social, economic, and racial boundaries that made empathy and intervention rare, if not impossible. The snow continued to fall, deepening the blanket of white that covered the landscape and obscured paths and boundaries. In some ways, this natural barrier offered protection, shielding her from the possibility of interruption, interference, or discovery by overseers or passers-by who might have reacted with indifference or cruelty. Yet the same snow, indifferent to human suffering, also posed a danger, as it threatened exposure, hypothermia, and physical collapse. The environment itself mirrored the ambivalence of the community, a combination of concealment and indifference that could serve either as protection or as a silent witness to tragedy. Her awareness of this duality sharpened her instincts and heightened her vigilance, reinforcing the need for careful, deliberate action in every moment of labor. The community's ignorance extended beyond mere physical separation. It was a reflection of broader societal attitude. In 1871, the legacy of slavery, racial inequality, and systemic oppression shaped perceptions, creating a world in which the suffering of enslaved people was often invisible, minimized, or The woman's experience, though monumental in its immediate significance, was likely to be ignored or forgotten, overshadowed by narratives of comfort, security, and celebration maintained by those who held power. Her struggle existed in a liminal space, one that was both intensely personal and politically charged, situated at the intersection of survival, resistance, and the invisibility imposed by a society structured to benefit from her oppression. Within the cabin, these realities shaped her approach to labor and survival. She moved with caution, conserving energy, managing pain, and preparing for the imminent birth of her child. Her awareness of the outside world, the community that remained oblivious, added a layer of urgency and responsibility. She knew that once the child was born, the demands would increase exponentially, and yet there would be no external assistance to rely upon. Every decision she made, from positioning her body to attending to the newborn, had to account for both immediate needs and the broader realities of their existence in a world that offered minimal protection. The tension between isolation and the community's normalcy underscored the profound stakes of the night. Her experience was shaped not only by the physical demands of labor and the harsh environment, but also by the psychological burden of invisibility. The absence of witnesses meant that the success of her efforts rested entirely on her own resilience and ingenuity. The snow outside, the silence of the town, and the warmth of homes she would never enter created a backdrop that highlighted both the danger and the courage of her action. It was a night in which the ordinary rhythms of community life continued unaware, while a life-defining struggle unfolded in secret, each moment a testament to endurance and the human spirit's capacity to confront unimaginable hardship. As the hours stretched on, the woman's focus remained unwavering. She balanced the physical demands of labor with the constant awareness that the community would remain ignorant, that help would not come, and that the stakes extended far beyond her own survival. This dual consciousness, the intimate focus on immediate action, combined with the understanding of broader social indifference, shaped every breath, every movement, and every thought. The community outside, warm, distant and unaware, served as both a stark contrast and a silent witness, a reminder of the profound isolation imposed by circumstance and social structure, and the extraordinary resilience required to endure it. Beside the newborn child on that fateful Christmas Eve of a mysterious object, whose presence would transform a simple act of birth into a moment laden with intrigue, fear, and profound significance. The woman, exhausted from the ordeal of labor and shivering from the relentless cold that had penetrated her cabin, was barely aware of the object at first. Her attention was consumed entirely by the immediate needs of survival, the cries of the infant, the aching of her own body, the urgent need to provide warmth and protection. Yet as the initial chaos of childbirth subsided, her eyes fell upon it, and a shiver ran through her body that was not entirely caused by the cold. The object was small, seemingly innocuous, but its presence suggested a story, a hidden intention, a secret carefully placed or accidentally left in the most critical moment of life and vulnerability. The item itself defied easy categorization. It was not a toy, nor a practical tool, nor something commonly found in the sparse surroundings of the cabin. Its texture and shape hinted at a purpose beyond the immediate practicalities of survival, and its proximity to the child implied a connection that demanded attention. Was it meant as a form of protection, a talisman, or a marker, or was it evidence of a more sinister design, left by someone else, reflecting motives the woman could not yet comprehend? The ambiguity heightened the intensity of the moment, layering her exhaustion and relief with a growing sense of apprehension. She studied it cautiously, aware that its significance might be far greater than its physical size suggested. For the infant, the object was irrelevant at that moment, but for the woman it carried both symbolic and practical weight. The cabin, cold and unforgiving, was a place of vulnerability, and the child's survival depended entirely on her care. Every instinct, every thought was directed toward ensuring that warmth, nourishment and safety were provided. Yet the object beside the child introduced a new dimension to her awareness. It was a reminder that the world outside, with its hierarchy, oppression, and hidden intentions, could reach into her private moment, leaving traces that demanded interpretation, caution, and sometimes fear. Its presence suggested that life, even in its most intimate and sacred forms, could not be disentangled from the broader realities of social power, control, and secrecy that defined the lives of the enslaved. The snow outside had masked much of the activity leading up to this moment, but it could not shield her from the significance of what lay beside her child. She considered the possibility that the object was meant for her, a subtle form of guidance or warning, though she had no way of confirming either. Its material, whether cloth, wood, metal, or something else entirely, conveyed a sense of permanence, as if whoever had placed it intended for it to endure the cold and be discovered at precisely this time. She traced her fingers along its surface, feeling textures and edges that were unfamiliar yet strangely familiar, as if resonating with some instinctive understanding passed down through generations. Each movement brought her closer to comprehension, yet full understanding remained elusive, and the tension between knowledge and mystery intensified the emotional complexity of the moment. The implications of the object extended beyond the immediate. In the harsh environment of the cabin, surrounded by snow and isolation, its presence could symbolize protection or threat, a marker of fate or fortune. The woman recognized that objects in her world often carried power, whether spiritual, practical, or psychological. Enslaved people frequently relied on small items imbued with meaning, charms, trinkets, and symbols to navigate a reality where autonomy was restricted and danger was constant. The object beside her child might represent a continuation of that tradition, a discreet effort to influence events, or a silent acknowledgement of the profound human significance of the moment. Alternatively, it could reflect the influence of others whose intentions were opaque, shaping outcomes in ways she could not yet interpret. Emotionally, the discovery of the object created a mixture of curiosity, anxiety, and reverence. Her exhaustion and pain from labor mingled with the heightened awareness of responsibility, transforming a moment of relief into one of contemplation and vigilance. She could not ignore it,
for the consequences of doing so were unknown, and in her world, ignorance could be perilous. She examined the space around the child carefully, ensuring that no other surprises awaited, recognizing that the presence of one unexpected item might signify others. Her mind, already taxed by the ordeal of childbirth and the demands of survival, expanded to accommodate this additional layer of complexity, reflecting both intelligence and instinct, honed by years of navigating a dangerous and restrictive. The object's proximity to the newborn also implied a narrative beyond the individual. Its placement suggested intention, signaling that someone or something had influenced the circumstances of the birth in a deliberate manner. Whether the woman was a participant in this act, a passive recipient, or entirely unaware of its origins, the presence of the object became a link between her personal struggle and the broader context of the world around her. It connected the private, intimate sphere of childbirth with the larger, often harsh realities of social hierarchy, secrecy, and the invisible forces that shaped the lives of the enslaved. Its significance was amplified precisely because it existed in the liminal space between danger and protection, fear and hope, ignorance and understanding. As she continued to care for her child, the object remained a silent presence, a reminder of the complexity and unpredictability of life in her circumstances. Each glance at it reinforced both vigilance and curiosity, a dual awareness that heightened her senses and sharpened her instinct. In a world where so much was uncertain, the object offered a focal point, a symbol around which meaning could be constructed, even as its ultimate significance remained unclear. Its presence forced reflection on questions of safety, intention, and the unseen hands that might influence outcomes in ways both subtle and profound. Time itself seemed to slow around the object, as if the very act of its discovery had created a pause in the natural rhythm of the night. Each second was weighted with the implications of its presence, the possibilities it represented, and the unknown consequences it might entail. The woman, though fatigued and weakened, engaged in a mental and emotional vigilance that rivaled the physical demands she had endured just moments before. She understood that life and death, protection and threat, were intertwined in ways that could be signaled by something as small and seemingly insignificant as the object beside her child. Its impact on her perception of safety, control, and future action was profound, shaping decisions and awareness in a manner disproportionate to its physical size. The presence of the object also reflected the larger human tendency to imbue meaning in the most precarious circumstance. In a moment of extreme vulnerability where the outcome of life itself hung in the balance, humans instinctively search for signs, symbols, and anchors that provide guidance, reassurance, or warning. The woman's recognition of the object's importance, her careful attention to its details, and her consideration of its potential purposes demonstrate this innate drive to find order and meaning in chaos. It became a point of focus, a tangible representation of the uncertainty and complexity that defined her existence, and a reminder that even the smallest elements could carry enormous weight. The snow outside, still falling quietly, contrasted sharply with the intensity of the cabin's interior, while the world beyond remained largely unaware of the significance of this birth, and the object beside the infant. Within the confines of the cabin, meaning, danger, and mystery converged. The woman's understanding of this convergence, though incomplete, was instinctive and immediate, reflecting a deep connection between experience, intuition, and survival. Each decision she made regarding the child, each movement to provide warmth or comfort, was informed by an awareness of the object and the potential implications it held. The combination of isolation, vulnerability, and discovery created a moment of profound significance. The object beside the newborn transformed the simple act of birth into an event charged with symbolism, risk, and narrative complexity. Its presence reminded the woman that even in the most intimate and critical moments, the forces of the world, visible and invisible, intentional and indifferent, could exert influence, shaping outcomes in ways that demanded both attention and respect. It became a silent witness, a marker of meaning, and a catalyst for reflection, emphasizing that life, particularly life born into hardship, is never simple, never solitary, and never free from the unseen hands of circumstance. The object that lay beside the newborn on that fateful Christmas Eve of 1871 did more than merely exist in the physical space of the cabin. It carried with it an aura that sparked fear, curiosity, and speculation among those who would eventually discover it. Though the woman in the cabin bore the immediate responsibility of her child, the existence of the object introduced an element of mystery that extended beyond her personal struggle, suggesting that the moment of birth was imbued with meaning, intention, and consequence, far larger than she could fully comprehend at the time. Its presence implied a connection to forces unseen, whether human, spiritual, or symbolic, that had inserted themselves into the intimate and vulnerable reality of childbirth. Under the harshest circumstance, each glance at it reinforced the sense that life, survival, and secrecy were deeply intertwined, that the arrival of a child into a world defined by oppression was never merely a biological event but a moment laden with social, emotional, and moral weight. When others eventually encountered the woman and her child, the mysterious item became the focal point of their attention, drawing speculation that ranged from fear to awe. To those unaccustomed to the realities of the enslaved, the object might have seemed unnatural, out of place, or even threatening. Its material, its form, and the fact that it rested so deliberately beside the infant, provoked questions about intention and origin. Was it left by the mother herself, as a protective charm or a symbol of hope? Had someone else placed it there, signaling an unspoken message or exerting influence over events beyond their immediate comprehension? Or was it merely coincidental, its meaning only ascribed after discovery by those whose imaginations and superstitions could not help but fill in the gaps? The uncertainty surrounding the object amplified its power, making it a source of fascination and anxiety simultaneously. The reactions of those who discovered the item were shaped not only by its physical characteristics, but also by the cultural and social context of the time. In 1871, the lingering legacy of slavery, pervasive superstition.
The birth of a child under the harsh conditions faced by the enslaved woman on Christmas Eve of 1871 brought into sharp relief the extreme hardships endured by women in her position. From the moment of conception to the act of labor itself, enslaved women were subjected to a relentless combination of physical strain, social subjugation, and psychological stress that few in the broader society could comprehend. Their bodies, treated as property and instruments of productivity rather than as vessels of life and humanity, carried the weight of continuous labor even as they nurtured new life within. Pregnancy did not exempt them from the grueling demands of fieldwork, household duties, or punishment, and the expectations imposed upon them were indifferent to the natural rhythms, vulnerabilities, and needs of motherhood. The woman's experience that night was therefore emblematic of the intersection of physical endurance and systemic oppression that defined the lives of enslaved women. Throughout her pregnancy, she would have faced chronic exhaustion and inadequate nutrition, both of which compounded the dangers of childbirth. The fields demanded long hours, often under harsh sun or in pouring rain, and the sustenance available to her was minimal and of poor quality, leaving her body depleted of the essential resources required for the growth and development of her child. Her skeletal and muscular systems, taxed by the repetitive and strenuous labor imposed by the plantation's demands, were ill-prepared for the sudden and intense exertion of labor. The mental burden of living under constant surveillance and threat of punishment added another layer of stress, elevating risks and amplifying pain. Despite these conditions, she persevered, guided by instinct, maternal determination, and a deep understanding of her body and the life it carried. The act of labor itself, conducted without any assistance, medical supervision, or basic comfort, intensified the inherent dangers. Modern medicine and midwifery knowledge were largely unavailable to enslaved populations, leaving women to rely on instinct, observation, and knowledge passed down orally through generations. In this context, every contraction, every shift in position, and every attempt to manage pain was navigated through a combination of trial, error, and inherited wisdom. The risks of complications, prolonged labor, hemorrhage, infection, or trauma were magnified by the absence of any intervention, and the cold, snow-laden environment outside compounded the threat to both mother and child. The woman's survival depended entirely on her own resilience, resourcefulness, and intimate understanding of childbirth as both a physical and instinctive process. Enslaved women's hardships were not confined to the moment of labor but extended across the continuum of pregnancy and postpartum recovery. Even after childbirth, their responsibilities did not ease. They were expected to return to work quickly, to maintain productivity, and to perform the labor demanded by the plantation without consideration for the healing process, maternal bonding, or the physical toll of repeated pregnancy. The social system ensured that their reproductive labor was valued primarily for the economic benefit it provided rather than for the human life it produced or the nurturing it required. The woman on that night, having just brought her child into the world, would have been acutely aware of the need to protect, feed, and care for her newborn in an environment that offered no structural support and no relief from ongoing demand. The emotional and psychological hardships were equally profound. Pregnancy and childbirth under conditions of enslavement were marked by constant anxiety about survival, separation from loved ones, and the potential for the child to be claimed or sold. The knowledge that the newborn's life was immediately precarious, compounded by the harsh physical conditions, created an emotional landscape of fear, vigilance, and determination. The woman's focus during labor extended beyond her own pain to include the well-being of her child, magnifying the stakes and amplifying the psychological stress she endured. In that sense, the act of childbirth was both a profoundly human experience and a confrontation with the structural violence of slavery itself. The social and environmental context of the plantation further intensified the hardship. The snow outside, while beautiful in appearance, represented a barrier to mobility, a source of extreme cold and an additional physical challenge. The cabin, poorly insulated and barely protected from the elements, provided minimal refuge, requiring the woman to expend further energy maintaining warmth and preparing for the care of her child. These environmental conditions, layered atop the structural oppression of slavery, illustrated the multidimensional nature of hardship for enslaved women. Physical, emotional, social, and environmental stressors converged, demanding a level of endurance and fortitude that was extraordinary by any standard. In addition to the immediate challenges of labor, the woman's situation highlights the broader systemic realities that enslaved women face. Their reproductive labor was exploited to sustain the economic foundations of the plantation system, while their needs, autonomy, and dignity were systematically ignored. Childbirth became both a personal struggle and a site of social and economic significance, a moment in which the continuation of lineage intersected with the imperatives of property and control. The hardships of the night were therefore not merely individual, they reflected the broader structural violence imposed upon enslaved women and the ways in which their lives were constrained, monitored, and commodified. The isolation she experienced during labor also underscores the extreme vulnerability of enslaved women. Without family, midwives, or medical care, they were forced to navigate the complexities of childbirth alone, often in unsafe conditions. This solitude intensified both the physical pain and the psychological weight of the experience, as responsibility for life and death rested solely on the woman's shoulders. In addition, it heightened awareness of the social inequities surrounding her, reinforcing the reality that her survival and the survival of her child were contingent, not only on her own strength but on navigating a society that provided no support, no protection, and no recognition of her humanity. Despite these challenges, enslaved women developed remarkable resilience and resourcefulness. They relied on generational knowledge, herbal remedies, and intuitive understanding of the body to navigate the perils of pregnancy and childbirth. They cultivated mental fortitude, drawing on community networks when possible, spiritual practices, and the drive to protect their offspring as a source of strength. The woman giving birth on Christmas Eve 1871 exemplified this resilience, her determination and instinct, allowing her to endure the physical and emotional hardships imposed by both her environment and her social condition. Her survival and that of her child was a testament to this extraordinary capacity for endurance in the face of systemic oppression and personal danger. Moreover, the experience of childbirth under slavery underscores the intersection of gender, race, and social hierarchy. Enslaved women bore the compounded weight of racialized exploitation and gendered labor, their bodies serving as instruments of economic productivity and social control while simultaneously performing the sacred, intimate act of bringing life into the world. The hardships of labor were inseparable from the social realities in which they occurred, and each contraction, each moment of pain was both a personal struggle and a reflection of a society structured to exploit their reproductive capacities while denying recognition of their humanity. The extreme hardships of the night, combined with the physical demands of labor and the social context of slavery, created a crucible in which both mother and child were tested. Survival was contingent upon resilience, knowledge, and instinct, with little room for error or intervention. Every action, every decision, carried consequences of profound magnitude, reflecting the intersecting pressures of physical endurance, environmental conditions, and social oppression. The woman's ability to navigate this crucible successfully illustrates the extraordinary strength required of enslaved women in childbirth, highlighting both the personal courage and the systemic inequities that defined their existence. The night of Christmas Eve 1871, with its relentless cold, isolation, and labor, exemplifies the broader experience of enslaved women across the South. It highlights the extreme hardships they faced, not only in the act of childbirth itself, but in the social, environmental, and structural pressures that shaped their lives. The survival of mother and child in such conditions was an act of endurance, resourcefulness, and profound human resilience, a stark reminder of the physical and emotional toll imposed upon women whose labor, body, and lives were constrained by systems of oppression and exploitation. The discovery of the baby beside the mysterious object on that bitter Christmas Eve of 1871 carried implications far beyond the immediate circumstances of birth, highlighting the fragile intersection between life, survival, and human perception under extreme conditions. The infant, newly arrived in a world defined by indifference and hardship, lay swaddled not in the comfort of blankets or the embrace of family, but in the cold, sparse environment of a small cabin subject to the elements and entirely dependent on the mother's endurance. The presence of the object beside the child transformed the scene from one of mere survival to one laden with curiosity, fear, and profound questions about intention, meaning, and the invisible forces that could shape the trajectory of life from the very first moment. Every detail of the environment, the snow-covered landscape, the drafty walls, the faint remnants of a fire, magnified the significance of this discovery, drawing attention to both the vulnerability and the extraordinary resilience that defined the situation.
The object itself, small and enigmatic, suggested a narrative that extended beyond the personal experience of the mother and child. It raised immediate questions. Had it been left intentionally? Was it meant as protection, a warning or a sign? Or was it a coincidental artifact, its meaning projected by those who would encounter it? These questions were intensified by the context of the world in which the infant was born. Enslaved people lived under constant surveillance and control, their autonomy limited by social structures designed to maintain dominance and exploitation. In such a reality, even the smallest anomaly, a trinket, a cloth, a piece of metal could assume profound significance, representing either hope or threat, intervention or surveillance, protection or malice. The infant's proximity to the object suggested that from the very first moments of life, its trajectory might be influenced by forces beyond its comprehension or control. The physical vulnerability of the newborn heightened the impact of the discovery. Infants born in such conditions faced immediate threats from exposure, malnutrition, and the absence of medical care. The cold of the cabin and the harshness of the winter night made survival precarious, placing the newborn entirely in the care of the mother, whose strength and endurance were already taxed to the limit. The object beside the child, whether intended for comfort or protection, introduced a symbolic layer to this vulnerability. It implied that unseen forces, whether spiritual, practical, or human, were present in the environment, shaping the moment of birth in ways both mysterious and significant. The infant's fragility made every detail of the environment consequential, and the object's presence became inseparable from the considerations of survival and safety. For the mother, the discovery carried both practical and emotional weight. Her focus, initially consumed by the act of delivering the child and managing her own pain, now had to expand to consider the significance of the item beside the newborn. It demanded attention, careful observation, and reflection. Was it safe? Could it serve as protection? Was it a sign of danger? These questions, layered atop the immediate responsibilities of ensuring warmth, nourishment, and comfort, created a mental and emotional burden that rivaled the physical strain of labor itself. The mother's instincts, sharpened by experience and the constant demands of survival, guided her as she navigated this new dimension of responsibility, balancing curiosity, caution, and maternal care in a delicate equilibrium. The presence of the object also reflected the broader cultural and social realities of the time. In 1871, superstition, spiritual belief, and the interpretation of signs played significant roles in how communities understood events, particularly those involving life, death, and vulnerability. The discovery of an unexplained item beside a newborn would naturally provoke speculation and debate, as humans instinctively seek to assign meaning to the unknown. This process of interpretation could amplify both fear and hope, shaping perception and guiding behavior in ways that might affect not only the immediate moment, but the social narratives constructed around it. The object's significance therefore extended far beyond its material presence, becoming a focal point for understanding, caution, and reflection. As word of the discovery spread, reactions varied according to perspective, knowledge, and cultural belief. Some may have viewed the object as a protective charm, a symbol of divine intervention, or a tangible representation of hope amid the harsh realities of slavery. Others might have interpreted it as a harbinger of danger, a signal of hidden malice, or a tool of manipulation intended to influence events. These interpretations, shaped by fear, curiosity, and imagination, reinforced the object's power, transforming it into a narrative device that linked personal experience to social perception, superstition, and morality. The newborn, while entirely unaware of the implications, became a central figure in a story shaped as much by human interpretation as by physical circumstance. The object's presence also highlighted the precariousness of knowledge and control in the lives of the enslaved. Life for women in her position was defined by uncertainty, about personal safety, about the well-being of children, about the intentions of those who held power over their existence. The discovery of an unfamiliar item beside the newborn underscored the constant negotiation between agency and vulnerability. The mother had to navigate not only the immediate demands of caring for her child, but also the broader implications of interacting with the unknown. Every choice, whether to leave the object, move it, or examine it more closely, carried potential consequences, reinforcing the high stakes of decision-making in an environment where oversight, danger, and ambiguity were constant. Emotionally, the object introduced a mixture of wonder and anxiety. The mother, exhausted yet alert, experienced a heightened awareness of her surroundings, her responsibilities, and the potential meanings imbued in the item beside her child. Each movement, each glance, carried weight, shaping her perception of safety and threat. The newborn's cries, the shivering of both mother and infant in the cold cabin, and the unrelenting darkness outside, combined to create a charged atmosphere in which even the smallest anomaly assumed outsized significance. The object was no longer merely a physical item, it became a symbol of uncertainty, a silent witness to the trials of survival, and a reminder that life itself could be profoundly affected by forces both visible and invisible. The broader societal context also magnified the importance of the object. Enslaved women were systematically denied autonomy, medical care and protection, and their children's survival depended largely on maternal endurance and ingenuity. The discovery of an object with ambiguous purpose highlighted the ways in which small interventions or interpretations thereof could have outsized effects in an environment where external support was minimal. The object's presence suggested that even in moments of private struggle, external factors, whether human, spiritual, or circumstantial, could exert influence, shaping outcomes in ways that demanded awareness, caution, and adaptability. The snow-laden landscape outside the cabin amplified the symbolic weight of the discovery. The harshness of the winter night mirrored the intensity of the challenges within, creating an environment in which every detail, every anomaly, and every object carried heightened significance. The mother's vigilance, the infant's vulnerability, and the mysterious object converged into a tableau of survival, interpretation, and anticipation. Each moment became a test of perception, judgment, and resilience, reflecting the broader realities of life under oppression and the extraordinary capacities required to navigate it successfully. The interplay between fear and curiosity dominated the emotional landscape. Fear arose from the unknown implications of the object, from the dangers posed by the environment, and from the broader social dynamics that constrained the mother's autonomy. Curiosity, on the other hand, drove observation, examination, and speculation, reflecting the innate human desire to understand, interpret, and assert some degree of control over circumstances. Together, these emotions shaped behavior, attention, and decision-making, illustrating how even a small object could transform a moment of birth into an emotionally and psychologically complex experience with lasting significance. The discovery of the object beside the newborn thus became a catalyst for reflection on life, vulnerability, and human perception. It underscored the intersection of the personal and the social, the material and the symbolic, the immediate and the potential. In a single, frozen moment on Christmas Eve, the infant's life, the mother's endurance, and the presence of the enigmatic item converged to create a narrative that extended far beyond the confines of the cabin. The object's ambiguity, its potential meaning, and its implications for both survival and interpretation elevated it from a mere artifact to a central figure in the story of that night, transforming an act of birth into a complex interplay of fear, hope, resilience,
and human imagination. The presence of the mysterious object beside the newborn on Christmas Eve of 1871 intensified the already extraordinary significance of the moment, transforming what could have been a private and intimate experience into one charged with layers of mystery and consequence. The infant, entirely dependent on the mother for warmth, nourishment, and protection, became the focal point around which questions, fears, and interpretations converged. Every movement, every breath, and every glance the mother directed toward the child carried an added weight, not simply because of the fragility inherent in newborn life, but because of the ambiguous presence of the item that seemed to occupy its own space in the cabin, asserting a quiet yet undeniable significance. Its existence, small in scale yet immense in implication, forced an awareness of forces, physical, social, spiritual, or symbolic, that extended beyond the immediate reality of labor and survival. For the mother, this discovery presented a paradoxical mixture of reassurance and apprehension. On one hand, the object might have been intended as protection, a talisman or token left by someone familiar with the dangers of childbirth and the perils of the environment. On the other hand, its unknown origin and purpose provoked unease, as she could not determine whether it represented safety, warning, or threat. Her instincts, honed by years of navigating a hostile and oppressive world, guided her to approach it with caution. Every decision, whether to leave it in place, examine it more closely, or move it, required careful deliberation, balancing immediate maternal responsibilities with the uncertainty and potential danger embodied in the object. In this way, the object forced a heightened consciousness, drawing attention to the broader network of influences that shaped life in conditions defined by vulnerability and control. The environmental context amplified the significance of the object. The cabin was cold, drafty, and exposed to the relentless winter snow, which blanketed the surrounding landscape and isolated the mother and child from the world beyond. In such conditions, the newborn's survival depended entirely on the mother's ability to provide warmth and comfort, and the presence of the object introduced both a potential resource and an additional source of uncertainty. Its proximity implied intentionality, suggesting that someone, either the mother herself or another agent, had placed it purposefully. This raised questions about timing, intention, and influence, further intensifying the already high stakes of the situation. The environmental harshness, combined with social vulnerability, transformed a simple artifact into a symbol whose meaning was inseparable from the context in which it was discovered. Beyond the immediate practical concerns,
The object also carried emotional and psychological weight. The act of childbirth, under extreme conditions, was already a profound ordeal, requiring immense physical strength, endurance, and mental fortitude. The appearance of an unexplained item beside the child added an additional dimension of complexity, forcing the mother to contend not only with the biological and environmental challenges, but also with the uncertainty of the object's purpose and significance. Fear, curiosity, vigilance, and contemplation intermingled, shaping her perception of the moment and heightening her awareness of vulnerability and possibility. The object became a focal point for reflection, a tangible presence around which her attention, energy, and emotions coalesced. Socially, the discovery of the object highlighted the precarious position of enslaved women and their children. Life under slavery was defined by a constant negotiation between autonomy and control, protection and exploitation, visibility and invisibility. Every action, every decision, carried potential consequences, dictated not only by immediate circumstances, but also
The aftermath of the birth on Christmas Eve of 1871, with the newborn lying beside the mysterious object, set in motion a sequence of events that would echo far beyond the cold, drafty cabin in which it occurred. The immediate priority for the mother was the survival of herself and her child, yet the presence of the object introduced questions, challenges, and responsibilities that extended beyond the physical act of childbirth. Her exhaustion, physical pain, and exposure to the elements were compounded by the psychological and emotional weight of interpreting the object's meaning, assessing its potential significance, and determining how it might influence the delicate balance of safety and vulnerability in which she and her infant now existed. Each decision she made carried both immediate and long-term consequences, underscoring the intertwined nature of maternal responsibility, environmental hardship, and the uncertainty represented by the enigmatic item beside her child. The physical environment played a critical role in shaping the urgency and intensity of these considerations. The cabin, sparsely furnished and poorly insulated against the winter cold, provided minimal protection from the snow-laden landscape outside. Each gust of wind, each draft that cut through the walls, reminded the mother that the newborn's survival depended entirely on warmth, shelter, and careful attention. The object, situated nearby, demanded that her awareness extend beyond immediate physical care, forcing her to consider the implications of its presence in the fragile environment. It was a reminder that life and safety were influenced not only by visible conditions but also by unknown factors, whose significance might only reveal itself over time. The interplay of physical exposure and mysterious presence created a heightened sense of vigilance, sharpening her instincts and compelling her to act with both caution and decisiveness. Beyond the immediate environmental challenges, the social context amplified the significance of the object. The mother's life, and by extension the life of her newborn, existed within a system of oppression and limited autonomy. Enslaved people were constantly subjected to the scrutiny and control of those in power, their movements, decisions, and survival constrained by systemic inequity. The object, whether intentionally placed or fortuitously positioned, became part of this social landscape, introducing questions about intention, authority, and influence. It forced consideration of unseen forces, whether human agents with knowledge of the cabin's interior, neighbors observing from a distance, or broader societal structures imposing indirect control over every aspect of the mother's existence. Its presence highlighted the inescapable reality that life under such conditions was never private, never entirely within one's own control, and that even intimate acts like childbirth were shaped by external forces beyond immediate perception. The emotional dimension of the object's presence was equally significant. The mother, exhausted and in pain, had to navigate a complex interplay of fear, curiosity, and protective instinct. The unknown origin and purpose of the item provoked anxiety, as she could not determine whether it represented safety, threat, or mere coincidence. At the same time, it sparked curiosity, compelling her to examine it, understand its significance, and integrate its presence into her ongoing maternal responsibility. This dual emotional impact, fear tempered by inquisitiveness, exemplified the heightened state of awareness demanded by survival in extreme circumstance. Her attention, already divided between the physical needs of the infant and the management of her own recovery, now encompassed an additional layer of psychological complexity, underscoring the multi-dimensional challenges faced by enslaved women in moments of crisis. The object also served as a lens through which to consider broader symbolic and spiritual interpretations. In a cultural context in which signs, talismans, and symbolic items carried weight, its presence could be understood as an emblem of protection, guidance, or warning. For the mother, recognizing these possibilities meant acknowledging that life and survival were influenced not only by immediate physical actions but also by the symbolic and moral universe in which she lived. The presence of the object suggested that forces beyond the tangible, whether spiritual, social, or psychological, played a role in shaping outcomes requiring attention, interpretation, and in some cases ritual or precautionary action. Its significance was therefore both practical and symbolic, integrating the immediate needs of survival with broader frameworks of meaning and belief. As the night progressed, the mother's awareness of the object's significance deepened. Each movement, whether tending to the child, adjusting coverings for warmth, or inspecting the cabin for additional hazards, was informed by the presence of the item. It became a silent guide, a constant reminder that her actions were not merely responses to physical circumstances but also part of a larger tableau in which meaning, intention, and consequence converge. The object's ambiguity demanded vigilance, shaping both thought and behavior in ways that reinforced the interdependence of observation, interpretation, and action in survival scenarios. In this sense, the item became both a practical consideration and a psychological touchstone, influencing decisions in subtle yet profound ways. The implications of the object extended beyond the immediate night. In the days and weeks that followed, its presence would influence the mother's understanding of the environment, her trust in those around her, and her strategies for safeguarding the child. It became a reference point for caution, a reminder of the need to remain alert, and a symbol of the precarious balance between agency and vulnerability. Each encounter with the item reinforced the awareness that survival in the context of enslavement required not only physical endurance but also constant attention to social, environmental, and symbolic cues. Its significance was amplified precisely because it intersected with moments of vulnerability, uncertainty, and high stakes, serving as both a warning and a guide in the absence of external support. The social ramifications of the object's discovery were multifaceted. Its presence, once observed by others, became a focal point for speculation, interpretation, and storytelling. Those who encountered it, whether contemporaries, overseers, or later chroniclers, projected onto it fears, hopes, and assumptions shaped by their cultural context. Its meaning was therefore not static but evolved according to perception, social position, and interpretation. For the mother, this dynamic reinforced the reality that her private moment of childbirth could not be disentangled from the perceptions, judgments, and intentions of others, further highlighting the constrained autonomy that characterized life under slavery. The object became a nexus in which private experience, social scrutiny, and cultural narrative intersected. The interplay between fear, hope, and vigilance dominated the psychological landscape. The mother's fear stemmed from uncertainty about the object, about the infant's survival, and about potential threats in the environment. Her hope arose from resilience, maternal instinct, and the possibility that the object represented protection or guidance. Vigilance was required to navigate both emotional currents, ensuring that immediate physical needs were met while also considering the potential implications of the object's presence. This complex mental and emotional engagement exemplified the extraordinary cognitive and emotional demands placed upon enslaved women during moments of crisis, reflecting a combination of instinct, experience, and interpretive reasoning that allowed survival under extreme conditions. The environmental, social, and psychological